basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Donald Trump is pretty angry at Israel and Iran after their ceasefire broke down. But what kind of words will he use for his NATO allies as he heads to a summit of the Defence Alliance in Europe? We'll discuss on this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, but straight away let's head over to The Hague in the Netherlands because that is where all the leaders of the NATO nations are meeting for this summit. Lots for them to talk about, whether it's what's going on between Israel and Iran, whether it's what's going on between all of them and their so-called ally Donald Trump, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, whether it's how much they're all going to spend on defence over the next few years. Lots and lots to discuss with friend of the podcast. In fact, more than a friend, family member of the podcast, Katya Adler, who's there. Hello, Katya.
Hello.
Right, there's about 9 million things we could say about this summit. Where would you like to start?
Everything in one go. Why not? Let's give it a go. I could just do an Adler monologue for you.
Oh, I haven't had one of them for a while. But you know what?
It's really...
Let's break it up into a few things.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Let's start with the disruptor, Donald Trump. And you and I have covered a few NATO summits in the past where Donald Trump has really disrupted things. So he's on his way now as we're recording this episode of Newscast. And just before he left Washington, D.C., in fact, he was heading to his helicopter, he delivered a soundbite for the ages where he gave his reaction to Iran and Israel breaching the ceasefire that he thought he'd negotiated between the two of them on Monday night. Let's have a little bit of a listen.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
So a quite bad-tempered Donald Trump on his way to The Hague.
That's right. And I have to say that in the media centre that you see behind me, as we all heard that expletive from Donald Trump, quite a few expletives went off around this room as well. People say, have you heard that? There was a concern at the NATO summit that it was going to be overshadowed by Iran. But right now, I mean, in the last few minutes, the new shadow over this is a private message from the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, who you know, Adam, whose message was leaked. It was basically copied and pasted by Donald Trump while on Air Force One on his social media channel, Truth Social. And it is just excruciatingly fawning. It even kind of mimics Donald Trump's style of writing on social media. So Mark Rutte crows that he's got European allies to pay up in a big way, written in capital letters, and saying that this is a win for Donald Trump, and praising the bombing in Iran, which just yesterday Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had questioned the legality of. So, I mean, privately, that has gone down like a lead balloon amongst many NATO allies. I don't like the tone of that message. Mark Rutte has just said literally a few minutes ago that he has nothing to apologise for. But I mean, if we're honest here, this whole summit, Adam, was organised around wooing Donald Trump. So this is just more wooing, I think. The worry is that because he's so known to be a NATO skeptic, that he's going to start pulling US troops out of Europe. There's 100,000 of them here at the moment. And US capabilities that Europe really, really relies on as well, like Air Force capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, you know, all of that sort of thing. And so there is an attempt here to say, please stay with us, Donald Trump. And he's been annoyed in the past that Europeans haven't paid more for their own defence. And so most European allies, including the UK, have said, OK, we're going to do what you've asked. Specifically, massive hike in defence spending to 5% of GDP, so 5% of national income. I mean, that is massive. We can go into the details of that if you like.
Well, especially as some countries are currently spending less than 2%, and the UK is going to have to make some tough decisions to get to 2.6. Just on that 5% figure, though, Katya, we should say that it's being sliced and diced in different ways, so it's not all being spent on purely military things.
Yes, sliced and diced, I'd say being creative with numbers, because obviously it is just a huge amount. If you think, I mean, you were just saying for the UK it's so painful to get to 2.6%. So it's estimated that to go up just 1% more of GDP will cost 35-40 billion pounds a year. So it's a lot of money. And you know, the whole time we're saying, where's the money for the NHS? Where's the money for prisons? Where's the money for this? Where's the money for that? This is a lot more money. So that is a problem facing all governments who sign up to this. Is it going to be new taxes? Is it going to be new government borrowing? That would be a problem for the UK. There's already a lot of government debt. Look at Italy, massive amounts of government debt. You'd be paying all this extra just to service that debt. Or will there be cuts to welfare? So, this is going to be a big, big headache for government. So to slightly sweeten the pill, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, has divided that 5%. So he can say to Donald Trump, we've got your 5%. But in actual terms, it's 3.5% of GDP, so national income, on defence spending, and that brings Europe into line with the United States, which currently spends 3.4% of GDP. So that's pretty historic that they're neck and neck then, finally. And the last 1.5% would be on defence-related spending. So the UK is looking at, cracking down on people smugglers gangs, for example. France is looking at cybersecurity. So, it's a bit boxing and coxing with numbers. But even if you do that, it's a lot of money to find. So the UK and other countries have asked for a 10-year window to get there. Spain has point blank just refused and said, no, we're just not doing it. So even though Mark Rutte sent this message to Air Force One saying, I've got them to spend big, it's not quite all of them, because Slovakia's muttering, Belgium's muttering, so it's not quite the united front he wanted to present. But Mark Rutte's got his hands over his ears, and I think Donald Trump too, actually.
And yeah, with Spain, I saw some reporting saying that Spain had just refused to sign up to the target, and then I saw some other reporting saying, oh, it's not quite as bold as that. What is your understanding of the Spanish situation? Do they have an opt-out from this?
Well, they say they have agreed an opt-out. They said that on Sunday. And I talked to Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, yesterday, and he said there are no opt-outs and there are no deals. So I put it to him that on the weekend we also heard from a certain Mr. Trump who said, yeah, everybody's got to spend this 5% except for the United States. So I said, will you be making it clear to the US president then that there are no opt-outs and no deals? But to be fair, if you look at the maths, the US already spends 3.4% on defence, and it definitely spends 1.5% on defence-related issues like cybersecurity or surveillance or whatever. So, and Donald Trump says, we are all in this together. There is no opt-out officially for Spain, but I think this is just kind of being glossed over. Spain says it can reach the same targets that Donald Trump wants by spending 2.1% of GDP. It's not even there yet. There's a lot of bad blood about it, but I think everybody's just moving on. Like I say, the focus for this summit is to woo Donald Trump and get him to publicly voice his commitment to NATO and also to Article 5. I mean, that one for all and all for one clause. It's not quite that. That's sort of a bit of a summary of it, but just the idea that if another NATO member is attacked, and there are great worries, as you know, in Eastern Europe, that Russia, with its economy on a war footing, even if there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, won't stop there. So that the hope is to get Donald Trump to say, I'm with all of you guys. That is what is wanted from this. So that also leads to the question, Adam, what about Ukraine? Because in previous NATO summits, Ukraine has been front and center. They're here. President Zelensky's here tonight. He's at a dinner with all of the leaders. They hope Donald Trump will get here in time to join them as well with the Dutch King and Queen. But he's not being invited to that closed-door meeting tomorrow. The summit is being kept short. Mark Rutte hopes sweet, so that Donald Trump arrives and leaves before there's any more controversy.
And on the Ukraine issue, is there going to be a sort of NATO-wide condemnation of Russia by the end of this in some document somewhere?
Oh, there's documents. Yes. Well, so before any of these big meetings, there's always discussion amongst diplomats about what the final statement or the final communique is going to look like, which sort of, it's like before the meeting takes place, they've already decided what everybody's going to agree on. But that's because the diplomats do the work and then the leaders come and sort of kind of sign off on things. It was a big struggle with the Americans. When we heard the US ambassador to NATO at a press briefing, the question was, will you sign up to the fact that Russia is the main aggressor, the main threat facing NATO allies? And he sort of kind of avoided it. The assumption is there will be talk about Russia being a threat, but the exact wording, exact, we're not quite sure of at this moment. I mean, this is the thing. NATO allies particularly, the Europeans, so anxious to keep US capabilities and attention, focused on this continent. But at the same time, they were already asking big questions about Donald Trump. He seems to have had so far quite a softly approach with Vladimir Putin, while he's come down really hard on Ukraine. I mean, you'll remember that awful Oval Office meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump, in the Oval Office back in February. And that's part of the reason why behind the scenes there was an intention to try and keep the leaders separate, although the Ukrainians really hope the presidents will have a face-to-face meeting tomorrow. We'll see, Adam, we'll see.
And Katya, just to go back to where we started talking about Iran, do you think the differences on Iran are going to blow out into the open and become a potential derailing thing? Or actually, is it in everyone's interest to just sort of bury those differences? Because bearing in mind, as you were suggesting a few minutes ago, all last week, France, Germany, the UK were calling for de-escalation and saying, we don't think Donald Trump's going to bomb the Iranian nuclear program. And then on Saturday night, Donald Trump escalated the situation by bombing the Iranian nuclear program. Yeah,
it's awkward. Clearly, it's in everybody's interest. Well, it's definitely in the Europeans' interest to smooth all of this because, as I said, their focus is to get Donald Trump involved in NATO and to express his commitment to NATO and to protecting all of its allies. But you never know with Donald Trump. You never know. Also, you never know really with President Macron. Like I said yesterday, he was very clear. He was questioning the legality of US strikes on those 3 nuclear sites in Iran. So who knows? And to be honest, I mean, I spoke to the former US ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, and she said to me, who knows with Donald Trump, full stop. Even if NATO allies go through this pain of step by step over the next 10 years, say, getting to that 5% of GDP on defence and defence-related projects, there's still no guarantee that this year, next month, Donald Trump, even if he expresses commitment tomorrow or tonight at the dinner, might not change his mind in a couple of days' time. It's something to note that the Americans are looking at their defence capabilities abroad at the moment, and there are announcements expected in autumn. And there are a lot of diplomats and security experts who think that 20,000 of the US troops currently in Europe will be pulled out, because the US is not just about Donald Trump being annoyed with Europe or whatever. It's also because, and he's far from the first president to feel this way, think about Obama in 2011, 2012, who wants to pivot more to China, to the Indo-Pacific. They need the same capabilities they have invested in Europe and troops as well. They want to push more to the Indo-Pacific. We've heard that from Hegseth, for example. So Joe Biden, when he was president, so soon after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he brought in 20,000 extra troops to kind of bolster defences for NATO allies in Eastern Europe. And it's thought that 20,000 will be the first to go. We could hear that in autumn. So, I mean, there's no way of knowing.
Now, Katya, I've got a surprise for you. Guess who's just popped up from somewhere else at the NATO summit? Or maybe he's actually right next to you and I just don't know. It's Chris Mason.
Hello.
Hello, Chris Mason.
I am also in The Hague, yes, but Adam, I'm not in the same spot as Katya. I am down the road, having been busily working away on a 6 o'clock news piece on something that wasn't entirely related to all things here. So, yeah, I'll hopefully see you later, Katya, but yeah, just down the road at the moment.
I would love to see you. You were in Rotterdam, weren't you, with the Prime Minister?
We were, yeah. We were in Rotterdam, and then we dashed along to The Hague. And lovely sunshine by the canals this afternoon. It was lovely here.
Katya, I'm going to let you go. I'm just wondering, though, about the catering at this. Are they going to be eating, like, classic, like, North Atlantic, like, herring and roll mops and stuff? That's the sort of stuff that they like in The Hague, isn't it?
Well, so my colleagues have asked to tell you this, but I'm a lady, so I'm not so sure about it. But they've asked me to tell you that there is a coffee machine, and next to it there are biscuits, large biscuits called cock biscuits. But I said I wouldn't say that because, I'm a lady.
What shape are they?
I'll bring you one.
That's very kind.
Katya, thank you very much. Good luck over the next few days.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Right, I'm wondering if we need to bleep cock biscuits as well as Donald Trump saying the F word. Anyway, Chris, before we talk about what you are actually working on today, which is a very domestic politics story, a very Westminster-focused story, just that last point that Katya was making there about defence spending. Is Keir Starmer signed up to this 5% NATO target? Because all the UK government trumpets its 2.6% target.
It does, but yes, the short answer is he is signed up to it, and this is kind of how the maths work. So his target was 2.5% by 2027. When you look at the numbers now, they'll get to 2.6% by 2027. But in coming up with the 5% target by the middle of the next decade, it's 3.5% on core defence spending, you know, tanks and warplanes and that kind of stuff. And then it's 1.5% on wider resilience and security, as it's described. So things like protection from cybercrime or border security, for instance. Now, the UK reckons it'll hit that 1.5% on the kind of ancillary defence stuff by 2027 too. So add 2.6 and 1.5 and you get 4.1. They are still 0.9 percentage points of national income away. Am I getting my percentage points and my percentages right there? I don't know. Ish. Anyway, they're still short. They're still short. They would hit 4.1 by the year after next. They'd need to hit 5 by 2035 of national income. That is tens of billions of pounds. Tens of billions. Now, Prime Minister says he's committed to it, and folk say, look, in government say, look, when he made the previous promise about 2.5, he then budgeted for it and got there. But this is something that is 2 general elections away, because if the next general election is as late as it can possibly be, which is the summer of 2029, and then you add on 5 years to that, you get to the summer of 2034. So you're talking at least 2 general elections away. So who on earth knows the complexion of the government, the Prime Minister, the whole thing by then? But yeah, the short answer to your question about 5% is yes, he is signing the UK up to it.
And on Israel and Iran, and particularly Iran and the US, how is Keir Starmer and Starmer's team squaring what he said last week with what's happened this week? In other words, last week he was saying we are, as the UK, are pushing for de-escalation, and I don't see any evidence that Donald Trump is going to launch strikes on Iran. And then over the weekend, Donald Trump escalated the situation by launching strikes on Iran.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, he's just saying, well, things changed, and so we had to change our approach. So, yeah, he did say when we were talking to him at the G7 summit last week, pretty much this time last week in the Rockies, you know, he talked to the president the night before at the dinner, just before Donald Trump left, and President was signing up to the G7 approach to the kind of crisis between Iran and Israel. And I mean, moments, frankly, after he'd said all of that, you know, we were seeing the posts on Truth Social from Donald Trump and what became the relatively quick march towards those bombers heading into the skies over the weekend. He said, look, the circumstances changed. So he said he came back from the G7 and immediately held a COBRA, the Contingencies Emergency Committee, and made the various preparations, etc., etc. As for the president's effing and jeffing on the way here to the Hague, Keir Starmer is not a effer and a jeffer.
No.
And so when asked about it, he effectively sort of sat back on, if you like, his standard position on this, which you know has held. He hasn't moved from throughout all of this, which is that talk of de-escalation, etc., etc. He's been invited several times today to sort of offer a kind of either a character assessment or a sort of reflection on the president's frustrations, and unsurprisingly, did not take the bait.
And as we're recording this bit of newscast at 6:40 on Tuesday evening, Donald Trump's plane has just landed in the Netherlands, and so he is heading your way very shortly, Chris, and we can see if he'll do any effing and a jeffing when he gets off the plane. Who knows if he's got more angry or less angry as he's crossed the Atlantic. Also, I've just looked up, a gevulde koek is the Dutch name for an almond paste filled cookie. Hugely popular here in the Netherlands, and you can buy them everywhere in bakeries and in supermarkets, and the pictures look delicious. Anyway, right, now for something completely different. Your mind has actually been, on Westminster today, because there's this growing Labour rebellion against the government's welfare plans, which are meant to be being discussed and voted on in Parliament next week. Just talk about the scale of the challenge that Keir Starmer is facing here with his own side.
Yeah, it's really big, this, because, I mean, look, as we say over and over again on Newscast, because it's true, the Prime Minister's got this massive majority, and the advantage of a massive majority is you should never really find yourself imperiled when it comes to votes in the House of Commons, and that's exactly where the Prime Minister finds himself. So it's been brewing for a while, this. You know, the numbers of those who are not happy with this planned legislation is not new. There's been talk of, it running into three figures amongst Labour MPs not liking these changes to the personal independence payments and to universal credit. But what they have done is really quite a big deal. So to sign up to what's known as a reasoned amendment, this is parliamentary speak for an amendment to a bill that says, here are all the reasons why we think this should not be voted on in its current state. And when you look at the reasoned amendment, it's sort of and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. There's commas everywhere, there's semicolons everywhere. They don't like the fact that they don't think it's been properly looked into, they don't think people have been properly consulted, they think it'll drive too many people, an unacceptable number of people, into poverty, and they are really quite angry, and sufficiently so that they have put their name to a parliamentary document. This isn't just whinging to reporters or, writing a piece in a
This is trying to actually derail the whole legislation.
Completely, and there's enough of them that if they don't change their view, and the government also doesn't shift, if they were willing to also vote against the legislation in the House of Commons, could defeat the government. So you've currently got a situation where the government's plans and the number of people currently opposed to it are a kind of one of them's got to give. There's got to be some give. So I've been asking the Prime Minister about that today. And
what's his take on it?
Well, basically, for now, he's defending the changes. He says, look, it is a Labour thing to do to reform the welfare state. The welfare state has to survive, and therefore it has to change. And, those around him say, look, this isn't about cutting the welfare bill. It's just about limiting the scale of its increase. But it's interesting that the Prime Minister chose to say it's a Labour thing to do, because his opponents are saying it's a very un-Labour thing to do. In other words, it gets to the very being of what it is to be a Labour MP for a lot of backbenchers, the very essence of what makes them political, if you like. But when I was talking to the Prime Minister, Adam, he was pretty ducky and divey when it came to will there be some concessions, and on all of the specifics, really, he was a little bit vague. And they're going to have to do something. Does he really want to be defeated by his own backbenchers? No Prime Minister ever wants that. Does he want to just roll over and kind of admit defeat before that point? Well, no, not really. I think there'll be a fairly rapid attempt to assess just how many of those signatories would actually vote against in a vote. I suspect quite a lot, actually, because if you've gone to the length of putting your name on this sheet, and in so doing your reputation to a degree is set at the centre, then maybe you'd think, in for a penny, in for a pound, and you would. This is the biggest challenge to the Prime Minister's parliamentary authority since he became Prime Minister, and as I say, it's the sort of thing a mega majority is meant to protect you from.
Yeah. And we should just remind newscasters what these maybe there's only one person listening by now. Newscasters, what the changes are. It's personal independence payments, which are the non-means tested, nothing to do whether you're in work or not, payments to help people living with disabilities. It's basically making it harder to get some PIP payments. And also it's making the health-related bit of universal credit, it's bringing that down a bit, but at the same time increasing the overall general rate of universal credit that everyone can get, and also putting in £1 billion, the government says eventually, into getting people back into work programmes. That's in a nutshell the reforms we're talking about here.
Yeah, and the government also makes the argument that the changes would also mean that some people who are never likely to be able to work will not be continually reassessed. So their argument is that it is more helpful to those most in need of state support, but is also attempting to, yes, save money, but also encourage those who might be able to work back into work when there is this growing number of people who find themselves not working. So yeah, it's a really tricky one. So when you throw in the massive increase in defence spending that looks like it's coming down the track, and the reverse on the winter fuel payment, and then the benefits bill's going up anyway, and then the Prime Minister says he doesn't want to put up taxes on people he describes as working people, then how do you square all that off?
And also Kemi Badenoch, just before we started recording this episode, generously offered to support the welfare reforms, but with some pretty big strings attached.
Yes, not least cutting the welfare bill, which as things stand, these plans aren't expected to do. The reason for, I think, Kemi Badenoch's intervention in all of this is that, of course, the number of potential rebels that Keir Starmer is currently looking at can only defeat the government if all of the other opposition parties vote with the rebels. And of course, if you're an opposition party like the Conservative Party, you might be tempted, if you basically believe in the principle of changes to the welfare system and the broad efforts that the government is attempting, to offer your support. Brackets, it's not really supportive, is it really? Because you don't want to be propped up by your principal opponent, or one of your principal opponents alongside Reform these days for Labour. You don't want the vote to get through on Conservative votes if you are a Labour Prime Minister, in all likelihood. But yeah, Kemi Badenoch has sort of dangled that olive branch, except it isn't really an olive branch, and then attached conditions that it's highly unlikely the Prime Minister would be able to meet. So yeah, there are shenanigans to come pretty imminently down the track on this, because this vote's due a week today, a week on next Tuesday, and something between now and then on either side is going to have to budge.
You can say that again. Safe travels at the NATO summit.
Ta-ra. Talk to you soon.